Episode 57. This week we're speaking with the current ATP or a current ATP doubles player specialist, Raven Klaasen, South African.
I thought with the intro you're going to start with Average Andy and Super Steve.
This is Average Andy and Super Steve.
Raven Klaasen. Let's go through a few things. Raven Klaasen. So fortunate to talk to Raven. Raven is going to be turning 39 in October.
Been at it for a while.
Celeste and Raven, they have two kids named after U.S. presidents. Told us that they wanted to go with their first initials, but so you got Raven and Celeste, R and C, but now we got Reagan and Carter. We got a
So they're covered from the right to left, or left to right.
Well, it's pretty extreme today, right and left, but back in the day, everyone's a little closer to the center. But they got a Democrat and Republican. With Raven, as high as number 7 in the world in doubles, 18 titles.
Yeah.
I think he's won with 6 partners: Eric Buderak, Ben McLaughlin, Michael Venus, Rajiv Ram, Leander Paes, Marcel Mello. Finals of Wimbledon, finals of Australia.
Not bad, not bad.
2 tour finals. He's earned close to $4 million. There's a guy I need to ask for the 22.2%. I was at the finals. I went with
I think you should explain that a little bit. The 22.2% is anybody that you've trained.
Yeah.
You've said, hey, you got to give me 22.2% of your career.
Actually, when I used to start this academic program, this first-year students, I would say that, and a lot of them were so gullible. They were,
okay.
Oh, okay. With
McFly.
I've got a few free T-shirts out of the deal.
Don't be so gullible, McFly.
I was with Ram Ramanathan. We went from the U.S. Open over to Forest Hills, watched Raven play the WTT Finals, World Team Tennis. He was given an award for being the Player of the Year, Outstanding Davis Cup record. I think what we should have done is had a podcast just on Raven, his connection with us, his story in tennis. Done that first and interviewed him second. We're going to do that this week, or scheduled to do this week. I'm not sure when we'll post that.
Yeah. With
Jim Lair. We had a podcast just on Lair's contributions to tennis. Raven's story is an amazing story. A few things come to mind is just a South African player dealing with the exchange rate, to see adversity.
Yeah.
The South African rand to the U.S. dollar, rebuilding his game at the age of 18. That's part of the story. 3 knee operations. Again, to have Raven as a regular contributor, talked about with Raven and his father, Jappy, Jappy and Jappy. I've got to make sure I get it right. Mm-hmm. I've had South Africans pronounce it 2 different ways, but he just said that his father's playing more tennis than he is. He's
1 or 2 in the country.
Yeah. But I used to tell Raven to introduce himself both as a tennis player and a tennis teacher.
Yeah.
When he was a non-playing member of the Davis Cup team, he did a lot of TV work. A few of our other students from South Africa, Craig Tiley, John Lafayette, Jeff Gauthier, all spent time with us. They certainly know Raven's base of knowledge. I once heard one of his former partners, Michael Venus, say they asked him about playing with Raven, and he said it emphatically that he learned so much more from Raven than Raven learned from him. With the competency, spent so much time with us in the trenches on stroke production. I think he'd be one of the players on the Pro Tour would be very comfortable teaching beginners. We'll get him on the phone, but let me just say this. We can even wait. I'll repeat it when he comes on. So many stories, so many experiences. But when Raven was in the Wimbledon final, Roberto Calla, who worked with us for 15 years, he sent me a text that said, "Who would believe that Raven taught in the Dollar Clinic?" And he actually led the yeah. dollar Clinic.
Yeah.
But he's the type of guy who could go out there tomorrow and teach 6-year-olds, and I think that's a great thing when you think of a world-class tennis player, world-class guy. Let's get him on the phone.
All right, let's get him on.
One ring.
Hi there.
Hey, Raven, how are you? Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis podcast show. Thanks for being on.
Nice to be here. Thanks.
Yeah.
Raven, part of the introduction, you remember so many people, Roberto Calla from the past, all those years you spent with us? And
yeah, I do.
Raven, I recently had a college coach say to me that one of his players should do what you did. And that means hang out in the trenches and come back from playing tournaments and even be out there teaching 6-year-olds. But when you were in the Wimbledon final, Roberto sent me a text and said, "Who would believe that Raven Klaasen first taught and then led the Dollar Clinic?"
Yeah. It seems like yesterday, but it's a long time ago now.
Yeah. But let's start with this. I remember when you were 18 and I sent you into the classroom and you're supposed to sit up in the chair and take notes. A fellow student was going to teach you how to chart as you watch yourself play on film. I came in and you were laying on the floor with your racket bag as a pillow, sipping a Coca-Cola, and I growled like a bear, and that was it. I never had to reprimand you again. But you have such great discipline. Tell us a little bit about how your parents early on in your tennis days instilled that discipline.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at things you did as a kid and mistakes you made, but I gotta give a lot of credit to my parents because they weren't overly strict, but they certainly knew where to draw the line, and I think that was sort of a benefit to me in tennis, especially given how much effort and discipline it takes over an extended period of time to make it at this sport, so it kind of gave me an advantage that I didn't have to really battle myself to work hard, now I had many other battles to kind of get where I am in tennis, but at least work ethic wasn't one of them, so just then the biggest thing was trying to focus that work ethic and discipline into the right direction. But yeah, very fortunate to have parents the way I did who instilled a lot of great values in me, but also a work ethic and full support. I think the support couldn't be underestimated. They never had a negative thing to say about my tennis once.
And they were both teachers. I mean, I know your mother unfortunately just passed away at young age of 61, but your parents were both teachers, correct?
Yeah, both parents were teachers. My mom taught grade 1 for many years, and my dad was a high school teacher. And I think my dad's a passionate sportsman, and he would have probably enjoyed something in the sports field. But that's what a profession a lot of parents took at that stage, and they were tennis fanatics that happened to be teachers. And I think that those are two professions that really worked out well for me, time wise and sort of with the discipline.
And both your parents played? Your mom played too?
My mom played tennis, but she started later in life. My dad played more tennis, and they were both really good at different stages in their career, and that's how they met through tennis. My dad's father introduced them because he wanted my mom to play mixed doubles with his son, so that's how they met each other playing tennis. And my mom used to claim that she's the one that started things off for me when no one else wanted to play with me when I was a kid, So she's got the early years covered.
How old were you when you started?
That's hard to say, because the stories over the years are not so vivid anymore. But I mean, my parents played in South Africa every Saturday. They played leagues, So you'd have a summer league where you played singles and doubles, and you'd have like a fall league where you played mixed doubles and doubles. And my mom tells stories of running off the court to breastfeed me and then come back. So I've been around tennis as long as I can remember. And then I probably got my first racket that I can officially remember when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
But I was running around the court as a toddler when I was a kid. So,
Yeah.
But I also, they had me play multiple sports until I was a little bit older.
Oldest of 3 too, with some responsibilities always being the first.
Just quickly.
Yeah, I mean.
Sorry, I was just going to say.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just quickly, what other sports did you play?
It's hard to believe, but I really liked rugby growing up. Unfortunately, when we got sort of to the age of 14, 15, I ended up not growing as fast as everybody else. And to play rugby and tennis as a combination of sports is risky. There's other stuff you could do. I played cricket a little bit of squash. Mm-hmm. I did some athletics. But at about 14, that was the time I decided that, look, if I wanted to be good at something, I got to specialize there. And tennis was sort of the one that stood out for me.
Yeah.
Well, I was fortunate to make it to Cape Town and visit you and your family. I had been to South Africa before, but I had heard from you if you hadn't been to Cape Town, you haven't been to South Africa.
Yeah, Cape Town's a beautiful city. That's home for me. Even though I wasn't born there, I was born in a small town on the east coast of South Africa called King Williamstown. That's where my parents. That's the Eastern Cape is where my parents were from. But I moved to Cape Town as a 2-year-old, so that's really all I have. Real good recollection of it in my youth. We used to go back to visit the family in the Eastern Cape, but I mean, I grew up in Cape Town, and that's home for me these days.
Tell us about your father with our listeners, all the different cups. I know that people, Dave Sievertson, American, I just saw something, a good friend of ours, who you know, Dave Anderson,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's 70 and over and 60 and over. It just keeps on going. But your dad, like yourself, he's playing for South Africa?
Yeah, so my dad retired a couple of years ago, and his goal was to really give the tennis thing a good go once he was finished. And unfortunately, with the history of our country, when he was in his prime as an athlete, he didn't have the opportunities to travel and play professional tennis. So he kind of has a lot of motivation still to push himself. And at these days, they have veterans tournaments around the globe, and it's in five-year brackets. So he's currently at the over 65s, and he's usually somewhere in the top three in South Africa. He was number one last year, played a bunch of tournaments, got to number one, and he was chosen to represent South Africa in Mallorca this year in Spain. But COVID had the tournament cancelled last year, and this year South Africans are struggling to get out of the country with visas. So he's actually going to miss it. But I think he's going to make a push again next year. The tournament will be in the US, and he's likely going to make another push and try to make that next year.
That's awesome.
I know the USTA, our governing body of tennis, has the father-son. I think most countries do. Is that an event that's played with the ITF, father-son? You and your dad would be pretty tough.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good question. I'm not exactly sure how it would work. I played at our local club in Cape Town with my dad when we were a lot younger. I mean, we all had all sort of matchups. Me and my mom, my dad and my sister, brother. But I don't actually know any official events back home with father and son, and like you said, they probably would be a little bit cranky if I showed up there and played with my dad.
In our intro, we mentioned some adversity, being from South Africa with Iran, just dealing with the exchange rate, but then your 3 knee operations. But one thing we're doing with our GreatBase podcast is trying to get out educational content on stroke production. So another thing that's certainly adverse is a challenge is changing your strokes. So you came to us when you were 18, and 4.5 years, you used our place as a base. You talk to the listeners a little bit about changing your game, making changes in your strokes.
Yeah, I mean, it's at that age, it's a difficult task. You know, I think one of the hardest changes is recalibrating your mind. You know, because that's something that I spent a lot of time with in the last few years, understanding decision making. And I think at that stage, I'm fortunate I made the decision to go about revamping my strokes because it was necessary, but I didn't really have a good understanding of what it meant, you know. And I think going through those changes have given me the opportunity to kind of handle pressure that comes with playing tennis, because fundamentally the first thing you need to be able to compete at a high level is to be able to hit the shots that you can think of, you know, because otherwise none of the stuff that you can come up with strategically or you know, tactics wise matter if you can't make the ball go where you want it to go. So I think changing my strokes at 18, when I had already kind of achieved quite a bit by junior standards, was tricky. But I also knew that the big picture goal for me wasn't to be ranked 300 or 400 in the world. You know, I was looking to compete at the highest level, and I thought that was a necessity for me.
No, I remember you were PJ Domdo, correct? You both came over.
Yes, Peter John Domdo, yeah.
I think you're both ranked 1 and 2, and take the steps backwards. But you went, I'm going to guess that we have all sorts of documentation film in our library, but maybe 6 months where you didn't play tournaments. You went for a fair amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you know, when you're younger, every tournament you play, you think it's life or death. This is going to be the make or break. If I was to think back and look over at my career, sort of reflecting it, and I think how much time I could have probably spent away from tournament time and working on my game, because fundamentally you get to a point where you run into your proverbial limits, and that's where you make improvements, you know, because the unfortunate thing about this sport, the better you get, the better your opponent becomes on the other side of the court. So you want to prepare for that scenario every time. And yeah, I mean, I think again, to make the kind of changes that are required with stroke production, you can't have the pressure of winning and losing be on top of you, because that kind of will blur the process, because it's very difficult under pressure not to revert back to your instinct.
I remember watching you play in the Australian Open final, and I saw you afterwards, and there was a break point, and you really needed that. You needed to get that point back, and it was a backhand volley, And when you came to us, I mean, you would remember all the jargon, the left elbow down, and the grip was a little bit softer, angle the racket face up, the path goes down. And at that moment, you reverted back, and people that have watched you play should watch you hit a backhand volley. There's not many backhand volleys where people go through it and go forward like you do.
He's like, thanks for bringing up that memory, Steve.
Yeah.
You still have nightmares about that backhand
No, but
volley,
when I remember when I asked you, you knew exactly where I was coming from because our
no, I mean it's fundamentally the thing. Like I just mentioned earlier, it's you get to a point in your tennis career, your abilities where you run into your whatever your limits might be, and you're trying to get better in a few key moments. And then, like I said, in that match, we were quite handily outplayed. Both Eric and I were, sort of against the run of play in the finals. That was our first major together, so we kind of surprised ourselves. And I think our mindset might have been, not as intense as it needed to be. We were kind of happy to be there versus like trying to pick up a title. And that was our only chance for the match. And I got a little edgy. And like you said, I reverted back and I panicked that volley a little bit. And, I've had multiple times like that, but I've also had times when it's done good work for me, when I've needed it to. And then that's actually, that's the battle with stroke production changes, is trying to instill the new stuff to the point where you don't have to really think about what you're doing.
Yeah. I think it's, going back to the changes you made also is most players don't do that, especially if they've had some success. If you're ranked 1 or 2 in your country, most people aren't willing to go through big changes because they kind of feel I've already made it. I'm already there.
Yeah, this is I've had a mental coach now for 10 years, and this is kind of the thing that I've really gotten better at, understanding my game and having a what I like to consider good self-awareness, because Steve said this to me years ago, but like, the game's not surprising. You generally lose for the same reasons, especially at a high level where guys know what your strengths and weaknesses are, so you end up having this repeat process happen over and over and over. And what I've started doing more with my career is, instead of isolating individual events, you kind of look at how you handle situations over a period of time and say like, hey man, in 2017, I was really good on break points. I was really good on my second serve. I really handled these situations well, and maybe in another season, I was kind of not where I needed to be in those things. And those are kind of the situations that determine whether or not you have a very good season playing tennis. So, yeah, I mean, understanding and having a good awareness of your game is kind of where I've made the best improvements. And like I said, you're always tweaking. You never really settled because everybody's constantly improving.
I remember with PJ, we were it was right in the backyard. There was a qualifier for a futures, Harbor Island, I believe. And
yes.
PJ, he wins and he wins and he wins. I think he might have got through it and was even in the first round of the main draw. But when he did lose, I remember, you lost for the same reasons that you won. You played the same way when you won in the early rounds. And then I think we went from there and we practiced for 6 hours. I remember him just being shocked that we did that.
Yeah.
He was right across the street. When you were with us, I know you got a chance for a day or two to meet Vic Braden, and basically he's our number one pillar with everything from a scientific standpoint, all the rationale for stroke production. So basically your game, we would say it was Bradenized. What do you think today? I know you're obviously not around junior tennis that much, but a little bit, obviously. What do you think of when you see most juniors today with the way they're playing, and it's just, staying back and looking to hit one forehand, and approach shots are going away, volleys and overheads. And I mean, people would refer to your game as classic. But what do you think when you see people playing one up, one back doubles? And where do you think junior tennis is overall?
Yeah. So let me just start off with Vic Braden. I remember my best memory of him was in Orlando. He was actually on the court once with me, and I hit a few balls. He was watching, and he said, "Raven, you could tighten your latch. You can't release. You've got to let go of your latch, relax." And I was like, that's something that I've struggled my entire career, just trying to be more relaxed playing tennis. It stood out to me as it's like you said it yesterday, and it's so funny. You're trying to fight your sort of your personal characteristics there, and to this day, like oftentimes I hear the same thing. Hey man, you've got to try and relax. Don't choke on the racket. And but yeah, that stood out. With regards to with junior tennis, this is a tricky question, because the one side of me, the traditional side, hates to see the sport get one-dimensional. You're watching the same point construction, you're watching the same style of tennis work across the board, whether you're playing indoors, outdoors, clay, hard, grass, and that's sort of a product of what most sports are going through. They're trying to get entertainment value up, and they've made conditions where these things tend to kind of work a little bit better. What I have noticed now is that because everybody has played sort of the same style of tennis for so many years, I feel that it's slightly starting to limp back into the situation of like, hey man, if we're just going to be running side to side, it's a physical battle. It's no longer really tactical. You're going to see who's tougher and who can handle pressure for longer. Now people are starting to think about getting to the net, but not in the traditional sense. It's like you said, the approach shot is not really to approach. The approach shot is just to get up there and finish one volley. So to me, it's a compound effect. If you are not getting up there regularly, it's hard to become good up there, you know. And these days, people back themselves to pump a groundie than to get up there and dig a volley. Like I said, with how things are happening on tour. So I'd like to see a little bit more variance, but I think in order for that to happen, you probably have to get a situation where the speed of the surfaces are altered a little bit, where there's a slightly easier way to get that reward. Because what happens these days is, as in any professional sport, people do what they think is the easiest way to win. And currently guys think it's easier to stay back to win than to go forward to win on the professional side, which then filters down to juniors. You know, what they watch on TV is what they're going to copy at home. So I think for me, what would really happen is if you like you look at a guy like Roger, even at 40 years old, you know, if you were to increase the speed of the course by 15 to 20%, he'd be getting way more reward on his serve. So that the underspin backhand would be effective again. He'd be able to cover more at net, and he'd be able to keep points short, and attacking would be rewarded. You know, these days sometimes you stay patient and sit back, and you can just sit and absorb shots with the weight of the balls and the speed of the court. So I mean, it's like I said, the traditional side of me would love to see tennis go in that direction. I find that it's, to convince people to do that is becoming tricky.
Yeah, well, now we got these generations of players that just don't have the skill set, right? I mean, they didn't grow up learning really to hit flat volleys and approach shots. So it's dying out.
No, it's very rare when you see that. You know, you see the odd occasion where people have the skill set, but it's certainly not the norm. You know, it would be an outlier when you do see that.
Yeah.
Actually, I know that you've been a commentator with. I heard Jim Courier say one time that no one will ever hit a volley flat like Sampras, or I've heard Vilander say no one will play the approach shot as flat as Jimmy. And I don't understand comments like that. Coming back to having a mental coach for 10 years, I remember, and I share this story often, Raven Klaasen, with your self-talk, you used to say, no ways. So you'd come back from playing some tournaments, and we would line up like 20 juniors, and I say, all right, Raven versus 20. And it's each person got to play 1 point against you, and you had one serve. I remember my son Connor was first in line, and you come up and you hit your serve long, and you say no ways. And you know, Connor's over there. He's several years younger than you, but he might have been 12, and he's got his arms up in the air. But here's two more. Do you remember when I asked you, because it was a really interesting experience. You're the same age as like Gabe Wapner and Brandon Flanagan. These guys, you're taking a year off to play college tennis. So I asked Raven Andy to go. I said, hey, you're taking the day off. He says, just 5 miles up the road. Go watch Gabe play today. So you come back, and Gabe, I think all young players should have experiences like this, where they're the highest form of retention, teaching, highest form of retention for learning to teach.
Yeah. You got it, man. You're there. You got it.
Senior moment. But with Wapner, so he gives it to Leighton Hewitt lawnmower. He's got the fist pump going. And afterwards, you sit down with him and he said, well, you know, I don't think you really should have done that, because it was the first point when your opponent double faulted. I don't think you need to Leighton Hewitt.
I mean, it's again, I mean, a lot of the stuff is personality based, and a lot of the stuff is also you think you're doing the right thing, you know, and I always tell people, like, the tennis court will bring out your best and worst, you know. So and again, my favorite word these days, self-awareness, understanding when it's necessary and when it's not, you know. Generally on the first point of a match, it's not really going to affect the outcome. So
no, we threw everything everything at the kitchen sink at you. Another experience would be Alex Vukovic, who went on and played at Princeton. He was playing.
Yeah, I remember Alex.
He's playing Donald Young at Kalamazoo. So we have a copy of the tape, and then I have you sit down with them. And you're just a little bit older than Alex at that time. And I remember your comment watching Donald Young. You go, I am going to learn from this guy's walk. Of course, when he was a junior, I mean, he was walking like he was on the top of the world.
Crooked hat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, once you get past if you get a decent handle on the stroke production stuff, and then you have to step up there on a court with someone who kind of is in your ballpark and how you hit the ball. Then it becomes down to that self confidence, and I mean it's a fine line between where you get to the point of being arrogant and cocky and overconfident. But I find that part of the thing on tour is that you have very confident individuals who believe they should be here, and even the people who are insecure act confident as though they should be here, because that's almost a fundamental of being here, understanding that, hey man, it's a yellow ball on a court with the same dimensions for everybody, so you fundamentally have to execute a few things and you'll put yourself in a position to win.
Here is a question. I mean, obviously as a young professional, being out on the tour with no coach, and and I've heard you say this, is that some of the very top guys are doing so well. It's almost like you're competing against a team. But when you were young, I was looking for someone to just travel and play with you. I wanted to have someone who was over the age of 25, and then get myself in trouble here. They had not played college tennis, and they were not American. Obviously, if someone's over the age of 25, they have a little more experience, a little more maturity. But then also, I have a thought that a lot of college tennis players are spoiled because their coach does absolutely everything for them. And then here in America, the land of abundance, we're a little bit spoiled. So anyway, Mike Costa, to his credit, he had played doubles. Under Craig Tiley. So he was under the age of 25, played college tennis. He was American. But you guys played for a while. Then I went to a tournament in Orlando, and he was supposed to chart. He didn't get through the qualies, and he was supposed to chart your first match. I show up. He didn't chart. I show up the second match. Of course, he's such an extrovert. He has to deal with people, and so I said, Costa, I told you yesterday, I'm telling you today. I said, you're not playing with Klaasen anymore. He looked at me and laughed, but he never did play with you. But what advice do you have for these young players out on the tour? I can remember my son Connor. I said, why don't you just ask the person to play little ghost doubles when you're done practicing, because they have a tendency to look at each other and go, are you good? Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good.
And what are your thoughts on a young person being out there without a coach? Because you did a ton of that.
Yeah, again, I mean, I have sort of like a two-part career, like I look back at myself as a naive youngster, which is the case with many of us coming out. You just think you're going to get to 18, you might play college, you might not. And in a few years' time, you'll be at Wimbledon and you'll be, competing with the best players in the world. And that's not really the case. The really standout players, the ones that end up in the top 10, like what we can see now, the men and women, we knew about most of them when they were kids. They were on their way. So the rest of us kind of are trying to figure out, and some people figure out how to reach their best potential, and some people don't. And unfortunately, with the way with tennis works, being a global sport that's quite expensive, most people end up stopping the game before they reach their best ability, which is a sad thing to me, because you end up playing for a few years and like you're only going to get into your physical prime at about 25 to 28. But to play for those 6 or 7 years from 18, 19 to get there would cost you a fortune. So I think my advice would be like, have a big picture idea, because many times people focus on the present, the here and the now, and that kind of leads you to get irrational, and it's a very difficult thing, because I was there myself, every match is do or die for you. Every tournament is your last chance to make it. And I think that if you can kind of draw back and look at the big picture and be like, how am I playing situations? Am I dealing with situations better over time? And then you can track sort of improvement. But if you can't have a rational approach to how wins and losses happen in tennis, you are going to stress yourself out and eventually make irrational decisions. And I think that's kind of the thing that I learned over time is how important it is to focus on the big picture in tennis, and then tick the boxes along the way, because what happens when you're a kid, you have a result that goes against what you were hoping, and then you start becoming irrational and you start doing things that don't benefit your overall growth anymore, and one of my favorite stories is about. I heard this somewhere that Roger, Roger, we knew he was going to be good. The only thing with Roger was how good he was going to be as a professional. But when he came out of juniors, they had a conditioning coach with him who had like an 18-month to 2-year window to get him in shape to win tournaments. And when you tell someone these days, like, okay, we're gonna have a plan of progression to get you good in 18 months time or 2 years time, they feel like that's a big chunk of their career lost, you know. And I think that rush to success is what gets most of the normal players. Again, you're talking about a Sasha Zverev or Tsitsipas. These people, like you knew at 16, 17, like the only job here is to not mess this up, you know. But for the most of us, we have a shot at making professional tennis, and you're trying to make as few unforced errors along the way with your decision making.
Yeah, I do think that. I mean, you have such great knowledge for stroke production. In a lot of ways, it's like you need a physio more than you need a coach. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is, I mean, in the perfect world, I had everybody, you know. So, but unfortunately, you'd have to play a lot better tennis than I do to afford that. The tricky thing is that all you're trying to do is cover your bases. You know, if you have a set of eyes looking at how you hit the ball and you trust that, if you have a set of eyes looking at your body and you trust that, if you have a set of eyes looking at your mind and you trust that, and in the case of like a Novak or Andy Murray or Roger, they might have two sets of eyes on each job, you know. You can just minimize your output mentally, so that means you're maximizing your output physically, which is what you're trying to do when you compete, you know. And that's why these guys are good. It's not that they necessarily get better than what they would have been. They just sustain the higher level for longer, and that's kind of what I think is the benefit of having that constant help around, is that you have less chance of falling off a cliff. You know, you kind of can maintain a narrower bandwidth of performance versus having really good and really bad performances. The Novak that I see today, or the Roger, the Rafa, the fact that they were able to do that for the period of time that they did, just shows you how well they did at making decisions, you know, at not getting too far off that really high level. And I think that's the real benefit of having someone with you is the fact that I think your lows aren't as low, but you can still achieve the same highs.
Yeah. Raven used to tell a story about Tim Hinman when you stayed with him, just about how organized he was with his mates for a pickup soccer game. But the work ethic from the future level to the challenger level to the ATP level. I know that Navratilova, Billie Jean King spent some time with you, but what comes to your mind when you think of like Tim Henman and living with him, being his guest for a couple of weeks?
So actually, I mean, I trained with Tim Henman. I lived with Kieran Foster, who's a South African guy who was doing his conditioning at the time. So we did the 2-week off season. And yeah, I mean, the thing with those guys is Tim knows if he's going to try to beat Sampras or Agassi, you can't come in there under prepped, you know, because those guys are coming in really strong. So you almost have this situation where it forces you to be dedicated. So if you're not dedicated, it's a really difficult thing to fake that, you know. And I think a lot of those pros, when they're in their prime, they do it because it's just part of their daily life. You know, and I've spoken to a few players that I've now fortunately got to know, ex-players. I mean, Wayne Ferreira, some players that I've gone. And the thing that really starts to get them more so than playing matches is that motivation to do the hard work off the court. You know, like if you've been doing that for 15, 20 years, to wake up and do an hour warm up before you play a match. So fundamentally, what I find with the best players in the world, even if they don't enjoy necessarily what they're doing, they understand the necessity of it. And that's where you really look at the difference for me between a professional and an amateur. Like the amateur might have the ability to do the same thing the professional is doing, but the professional actually does it, you know, and that's where things like, I mean, one of my prime, one of the best experiences I've ever had, 1 year in US Open, I think I lost in the third round of the dubs, a night match, and Andy Murray took a loss also. I can't remember, it might have been to Kevin Anderson, but he took a loss, and it was, we were the last two matches of the night, you know, and I mean, Andy Murray's at this stage top 3 in the world, favorite to win the tournament, and he goes down in the third or fourth round, and we're in the locker room, you know, and I've just taken a loss, and I'm pretty gutted, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out what to do next. And Andy walks in there after just losing on center court, and I'm talking about like it's 11 at night, 10:45 at night. He gets off there, trainer gives him a protein shake, he drinks his protein shake, he showers, he gets in the ice bath, he stretches down, and I'm like, this guy's just taken the toughest loss that he's had all season on the last Grand Slam for the season, and he's still going through the things that he needs to do because he understands the big picture, you know. And I was like, man, that's where these guys just destroy the rest of us, because even in that moment when all the majors are done for the season and he's now fighting for a few more, personal goals for the rest of the year, he's still going about his business the right way, and that's where I was like, man, to compete with this, no wonder you're struggling to beat this guy, because at every single minor decision he's making, he's a professional. So you compound that over time, and it's very difficult to beat those guys.
That's like Kobe Bryant said, whether you win or you lose, the process is exactly the same.
Yeah, and like I said, it's you say that out loud to yourself, and you're like, I'm going to copy that, but you actually have to go do it. That's where the hard part comes. Like, you face with a tough decision. I was like, should I stretch or should I just go home? And
exactly.
Every time you face with those little tough decisions, that the guys that really are spectacular are the ones that they just make less of those wrong choices.
Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned Wayne Ferreira. I heard TFO. We're pulling for Americans to win, obviously, and I wish back at one point in his career, like when he's 15 and he had won the Orange Bowl, that he had been cornered like you were. It's like, okay, you need to, like, say his backhand volley. I mean, but he just simply said that he's learned so much from Wayne Ferreira on just being professional and what he needs to do to get there.
Yeah, just having somebody there that's going to help you make the
maturity
choices.
and it's because the horse does get out of the barn. You get to a certain point where you got to just work within their game technically. You can't go back and make drastic changes.
I think one thing too, like Raven, you were saying before, and Steve says this all the time, uses this phrase, is you can't microwave tennis. You can't microwave stroke production, and you can't microwave the long-term development. You were talking about, Raven, where you just got to do these normal, boring things you got to do, necessity over a period of time. So you can't rush that.
Yeah. And also, I mean, you really need to be behind the scenes to know what's happening. I mean, I see Wayne all the time. I actually know Tiafoe a little bit. And, the firstly, just a small point. It's very funny because, like, one of the big things that I see with these old great players coming back on tour is, like, you can't change that, the point of origin of the words. Like, Tiafoe might hear the same thing from someone else, but, like, Wayne was a top 10 player in the world, which is something that I'm sure is on Tiafoe's dream goals. So, like, you get that information from someone who's done it before, and it resonates a little bit better, than getting the same piece of advice from someone else. So I see these combinations work out quite well. Now, the real changes are being made on the practice court where we don't really see, So it's oftentimes when you watch a team play, and in a key moment something will happen, and they would look up at their box and they'd be like, the rest of the match doesn't matter. We were training for that shot at that time in this key moment, because, like I said, nowadays there's so many different technologies that track tendencies on court, where guys like to eat under pressure, where guys like to serve, which strokes break down, so that everybody has a good idea of what's going on out there. And when you see someone, achieve something that they've been struggling with in a key moment, and they break through, you'll see like an acknowledgement, like, that's what I was working on for this specific moment and that time. And the rest of the match, you're just competing for points and, trying to get to a situation where you can win. But yeah, Tiafoe is a spectacular athlete, and I think he competes well out there. He looks like he has fun playing tennis. And again, the challenge for him now is to kind of get a little bit outside his comfort zone if he's going to make the improvements that are going to push him through, because there's a bunch of young tennis players that are playing some really good ball at the moment.
Raven, with Andy and I were watching Kevin Anderson a couple of days ago down in Boca Raton, Delray Beach, actually. And I remember where you were offered the position to coach him when he was really young, through the connection of Illinois tennis that we've had. Also, when you're playing team tennis at Taylor Fritz, that they talked to you about coaching. At that time, you were still, I believe, playing singles. But my question is, do the doubles guys get typecast? In other words, because you're right now classified a doubles player, would people think, well, you don't really have the knowledge to be a coach of singles players? Do you think that's a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine you start with that way, because that's certainly what it feels like. But most everybody that's played doubles at some stage played singles, So there is a possibility to break out of that sort of stereotype. But certainly, if you think about your day in, day out work, you would be positioned better to help someone with a skill set required to win a doubles match than a singles match initially. Now, many guys will talk across the board, and you actually have Max Mieni these days working with Kei Nishikori. They both train down at IMG in Florida, and like I said, there is crossover, but there's less crossover than what you think, because the tendency is, if someone's been coaching singles, the doubles players are less likely to take them onto doubles, and vice versa. Probably more aggressively the other direction, because you kind of want to have quite a solid level of confidence and comfort with the person that's going to be, with you in battle.
Yeah. With advice, tennis parents. What advice do you have for tennis parents?
Oof.
Here we go, baby.
Yeah, it's funny because I kind of project to the future, and what I say and what I might do one day is, it's complicated, but it's a very difficult thing when you're so close to the action. I think that on the tennis tour you often see situations with the parents or the coach where it's worked out, but I think there's way more cases where the parents being that involved has been detrimental. And it's a hard thing to manage because you're wanting the best for your player or your kid, and it's actually coming across as negative. So like your desire or drive might be at any given stage bigger than theirs, or your ability to not switch off your emotional connection might make you say stuff that don't necessarily help the player in their development. But the biggest thing that I think with tennis parents is sort of like curb your influence initially, because in the beginning is where I think that the seeds are planted. If you have a horse that can run and doesn't mind being pushed, by all means go ahead. But I find that the early stage development, when kids are trying to figure out whether or not they actually want to have a go with tennis, is where a lot is broken. And if that initial desire is broken, then it's very difficult to turn that around and make someone good later in life. So for me, as I'm hoping that I would be rational enough to understand the process of becoming a professional tennis and know when to pull my punches and when I can 100% let go, because that's what I see. I mean, we still struggle with it on tour now. If we deal with a situation that we didn't like too immediately after a loss, sometimes things get a bit hairy and we get in each other's face a little bit. But for tennis parents, I think understand development and improvement and the big picture, so that you kind of know when you can really push and when you need to maybe soften up a little bit.
Well, it's interesting because usually, or a lot of times, the parents are involved in that initial, falling in love with the sport. Like with you, okay, I was hanging out, with my parents playing tennis at the club, so it's kind of like they start them off, then you have to let go and take a different role.
Yeah. Well, this is why I didn't mention my parents, because I find that whenever I speak about my parents, they're a bit of an outlier and an anomaly. Like my dad's never really been too concerned with winning and losing. He's always been considered with playing. So like the outcome wasn't at any given stage in my career. Now, obviously, when you lose a Wimbledon final, the outcome is quite devastating. But the reality was, like, the next morning I was like, hey man, you'll shake that off and you'll get back to practice on Wednesday and we'll prepare for US Open. So like the turnaround mentally was always easy for me, because the loss was never make or break. It's like keep playing. So like I said, in a lot of terms, like parents would have outcome based sort of direction, that like if you don't do it by this stage, then it's over. If you don't know, and I've never really had that.
Yeah. I know your father, it was on his mind because he was flattering. He told me that he was going to bring Carter to work with me when he was like 4 or 5 years old. But I think here's a good choice for parents as the coach, to say, well, as a parent, make a choice. Are you going to be the coach or the cheerleader? And they'd be much better off to be the cheerleader. If a parent went out on the court, they'd be much better off to just feed balls to a target and let the target do the talking. Like, hey, let me feed you more balls because we asked you hit balls, in such and such quadrant, and you only hit 3 out of 10. Let me feed you 10 more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a difficult area, because the one thing that I've learned over time is that players take different ways to get to playing really high level tennis, and stuff that have worked. You can see it in the history of the game. For a while, Australia was dominating world tennis. Then the US was dominating world tennis. Then Sweden for a while had world tennis, and then Spain. So you end up having this sort of copycat style, and eventually you'll learn that there's no real style. If you can hit the ball with any sort of depth under pressure, you're probably going to win a match. If you can make your first serve under pressure, you're probably going to win a match. If you can handle a second serve under pressure from a good player, you can. So effectively, you got to figure out those basic things. I mean, it's the one thing that kind of stood out to me in my career path. Like, I always thought I need to hit the ball bigger and harder and faster. Now, while you have to be in the ballpark for that, it really goes like full circle. Like as your kid, you're improving your skills. And then as you get better, you're like, man, can I just do the basics? Can I just hit a normal backhand return, into the court with some sort of depth and penetration when it's important? Nothing fancy, just the one that I know I can do. Can I just produce that now? And And like I said, that's kind of where I've gotten to the point is trying to de-stress the situation. Like, again, the conversations I'm having are completely different when you're talking about Novak going this year for, what would be almost his second career slam, because he's got the Novak slam, where we went from Wimbledon all the way to French Open. This will be a calendar slam. So I can't imagine the kind of conversations that they would have, or when Serena was going for the, calendar slam or those kind of things. It's above my pay grade.
Raven, there's a website where world-class athletes, they write a letter. So, for example, I don't know if you've heard of this, but if you had to write a letter to your 15-year-old self, that'd be a way to give advice to junior players. I mean, if you could turn the clock back, what would you tell your 15, 16-year-old self when you're playing junior tennis?
It'll be a very long letter, but the main point, and this is sort of my summary of what I've learned over the years, is that 15-year-old Raven Klaasen cared too much what was happening on the other side of the court. I would tell myself, focus on yourself. I mean, no one else can walk onto the court and hit a serve for you or make a volley for you. And I was always kind of fixated with what other players are doing, their speed of progress, like where they're getting to in tournaments. And I kind of lost focus on what I need to get better at, And if I was to do it all over again, I would be more intrinsically focused. Like, is my second serve producing the results I want? Is my forehand producing the results I want? Is my movement where I need to be? And concentrate on my own performance, because like I said, if you perform well, you limit what your opponent can do to you. And generally, if you're winning easy, it means you're not at the right level. If you're getting crushed, you're not at the right level. And eventually, as you improve, you get to a level where it's always a competitive match and you have to handle a bit of, sticky stuff under pressure, and then you win or lose. And that's what pro tennis is. You're never really that much better than your opponent, or they're never really that much better than you. You both are competitive, and you're hoping to get more wins than losses over the season.
That's great.
Raven, we know you have to get off to a trainer. We should have several, as I said earlier, have several podcasts. Love to do one with your father. You're going to be 39 in October, correct?
Unfortunately, yes, I will be 39 in October.
The founder of youth, I remember you telling me that if Roger can do it on a full court, you're going to keep going on a half court. How's the body holding up?
Yeah, I mean, it's thank goodness for modern science. The physios are much better at what they do these days. And, the knees have always been my thing. That's sort of like I had some knee surgery when I was younger. It's now I found out the shape of my legs just predisposed me to some knee funkiness. So, and running around on a hard court for this many years, there's always going to be something, So the body, when I can manage the pain, is fantastic. It's taking a lot more sort of off-court stuff these days than actually playing tennis, because that's the one area that I've lost out. I can't train as many hours as I want to. I make up for that sort of in the gym and the recovery process, because the body just doesn't allow it anymore. I mean, in the perfect world, I'd be as good as Roger and be able to be top 10 in the world playing 10 tournaments a season, but that's not a reality for me. But I think he's really recalibrated the way all of us have thought about tennis. This guy has shown us the way you plan for the future. And actually, this week in US Open, Ivo Karlovic just qualified, and I mean, he's well into his 40s now. So what's happening now with the sport is that guys have figured out ways to kind of lengthen their careers, and it's almost challenging for the younger generation to recalibrate what they think. Like, hey man, if I'm 23 and I haven't really broken through yet, I could potentially have another 10 to 15 years ahead of me, so there's no reason to panic.
Yeah, as long as you can stay out there financially, like you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, the sport's growing, perhaps not at the pace that we necessarily wanted, but there's more and more people that are able to sustain. Like the ranking you need to get to where you're in the positive is slowly kind of moving down the rankings. It's still, if you rank 500, you're still going to be in a world of hurt. But like these days, guys, 150 to 200 are able to stay in the black and not in the red as much as it used to be, and it's still not an easy profession because, like I said, if you're frugal and you can maximize, stretching your dollars, then you can do it a long way. If you're used to sort of maybe a bit more of a lavish travel style, then it becomes tricky, and that's very player dependent. But I think that tennis has always been one of the toughest sports to play, given how our infrastructure is set up globally. it's going to be challenging, and which makes it so sweet when you do find a way to kind of get to the other side.
Ray, can you circle back and with your knee injuries? It's inspirational. You were down and out, 3 knee operations, and how old were you? And at that point, it was bleak. Like, well, will you be able to play again?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I got the knee injuries, I was just inside 300 in the world, and you're very close to playing Grand Slam qualifying. So that was kind of the reason I kept pushing. Now, unfortunately, in hindsight, if I think about the knee injuries that I did have, my right knee is really my problem knee. My left knee should be totally fine. As I'm sitting here today, I still have some meniscus damage. And in the last 15 years since then, things have transformed to the place that the same doctor who did the surgery on me initially was like, if you can play, then rather play. You know, they tend to not want to cut so much. But what happened with me the first time, my right knee was the problem, and I played on a bad right knee for long, and I overcompensated with my left knee, which is the only reason my left knee got injured. It should never have been. If I'd stopped when I should have, I would have had one problem knee. The left knee would have never bothered me. But again, I grew up in a time in South Africa where like saying you're in pain or saying it's uncomfortable showed weakness. So I was like, I'm not going to say it, and I pushed through probably further than I should have. The second time, the knee just, the recovery period was supposed to be pegged at around 3 to 4 months, which is when I started playing. I think I just didn't take enough time to let it heal. So I actually had to go back in for surgery a second time. And that really kind of broke me mentally because I was like, well, I'm not coming back until I'm fully capable of playing tennis at the level I want to. And so it was about 2 years, give or take, from when I stopped till when I started again playing professional tennis. And in that time, I was practicing at home. I was playing a few league matches and stuff like that, just to kind of be sure that if I do go back on tour, I don't want to be playing with arguably my biggest strength limited, you know, because I've been able to make it in tennis because of my parents giving me a pretty nice genetic base and being able to run on the court. So if I can't run, then it takes a big strength of my game away.
I've got one last question on one-up, one-back doubles with the Bryan brothers, who you've competed against and got to know. They're not playing anymore. They've retired. We were just at a national tournament, and it used to be a little chauvinistic where just the girls were serving and staying back, a little sexist. Yeah. I had one young player. I said, why don't you walk around and see what's the percentage of girls that are wearing Lululemon clothes, and what's the percentage? What's the percentage of boys that are serving or girls that are serving volleying? But the boys, I just did a little bit of walking the grounds, and we have, you know, some students play and students of our students playing. But do you think that, I mean, you go to a college tennis match, Division I, men, many times 2 out of 3 are playing, you know, one up, one back, both back. Do you think that'll circle back, or do you think eventually tennis will just be one up, one back doubles at the pro level?
If you can serve and volley at a really high level, you're still going to be more dominant than not. Like in the top 10 of the world, there's still more people that serve and volley than stay back across the season. Now, there's certain occasions where it's beneficial. Like there's some guys that, I mean, this guy from Romania, Florin Majea, the number 1 junior in the world, got to top 10 in doubles. And I mean, with his forehand on the baseline, he had so many options that when he played on a slow surface, he felt like he could do more with that forehand in a tough stress situation than trying to dig a low volley because his second serve was pretty average. So like he made a conscious decision, like if I'm running forward, having to hit a low volley with my abilities versus staying back and my abilities, my forehand, it makes more sense for me. I'm going to win more matches staying back. So that's how these guys end up there. But until recently, there were only a handful of guys who have success. And like I said, if you look at who's winning the tournaments traditionally on the faster surfaces, you get the grass, you get US Open, you get Australian Open, you know, anything that's not on the clay for the men. Like generally, even the guys who serve and stay back, they still add a decent amount of serve and volley in there just for the option. So effectively, those people who have skill sets front and back, they tend to choose the option that they think is better for that moment that they're playing tennis. I myself will occasionally, like Rome this year, we played a night match, and then the balls are heavy, the court is slow, serve's not going anywhere. So even I'm sometimes like, man, I should probably serve and stay back because my first volley, if it bounces in front of me, I'm lifting the ball, and then these guys have a big target to swing at with options with their strings and spins and stuff. So it's more sort of a situation, I think, of the player deciding, I think the best chance to win a match is this way, and that could be a compound effect of what we spoke about earlier, a lack of ability at net, or just a situation where they think they are stronger to get points on their board with staying back and hitting a forehand. And like I said, that's why you see all these I formation switches, because guys are trying to get into certain situations that benefit them the most. The grass is probably the one surface where even the good baseliners they are forced to come in, because if they hit a serve that gets a strong return, they now have limited options back there. But on the slower stuff, when you play on the clay and on the hard, sometimes you hit a return and those guys back there have plenty of time to kind of see what's happening, you know. So it's not surprising that a lot of these players that wouldn't have been traditional doubles players are having success, because the game is played now with the start of the point. If you can dominate the beginning of the point, you most likely win more of them. So most teams are focusing on serving and returning, and then you're kind of adding a little bit of the rest. You know, if you can hit a good serve, it's better than hitting a low volley. If you can hit a good return, it's better. Which is why you see this aggressive short style of doubles these days, where guys would rather hit a double fault, or they'd rather miss a swing on return versus starting a point and getting position and holding the net, you know. So it's slowly changing into a style of, which is why a lot of us feel that clay court doubles is almost the most fun to watch these days, because there's more shots being played.
What we tell junior players and their parents is if a young kid is top 10 here in the U.S., for example, if they're a top 10 junior and they're definitely on track to get a scholarship at a Power 5 conference, one of the big colleges, then okay, we can work within your game. You know, other than that, you know, just check your ego at the door and do what you got to do.
Yeah.
I was
Raven,
say, just quickly, Raven, I know listeners may be interested in this, that don't you have a winning record over the Bryan brothers as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the numbers exactly, but it's got to be it's got to be. I mean, I feel like I've gotten a bunch of wins against them. It's at least 500. Yeah, they've also gotten me a few times.
Yeah,
but the thing with the Bryan brothers again, it's that, like, I mean, I caught them sort of once they were in their 30s. I heard when I speak to people when they say like 05 to 2012. I mean, they were at a different level in terms of consistency. You know, they do what these big three in singles have been doing, but they did it at an even higher level. You know, so in terms of, again, with them, they would have been pretty good singles players in their own right, because their skill sets, you know, are so complete. And that's why I think they were so consistent for so long. Mike Bryan, there was a stage where you didn't know where to serve to him. You know, his returns were that pure. Bob with a forehand on the baseline is really good. And Bob served with a lefty for the longest time. It was that game you didn't even concentrate, because he would just take it out of your hands.
Yep.
And that's why.
Go ahead, Raven.
No, that's why they had the success as long as they did. You know, because towards the end of their careers, they were still winning Masters titles, and to be, they weren't the same team anymore, but they had so many skill sets that could you know, they sustained under pressure.
Yeah. Competitiveness. One of your world team tennis coaches, you were, you know, the go-to guy in doubles. Then at the end of the season, or for some special matches, Mike Bryan showed up, and you had recently beaten him. And he was still mad. He was still trying to take your head off. And then I remember talking to you about it. You go, "That's why those guys were so great." My son Connor got to know those guys, and Connor was, you know, someplace at one of the Grand Slams, and Connor said hello to you, and Mike Bryan goes, "You know that guy?" Yeah, so he's still holding the grudge. He's still holding the grudge that that you beat him.
No. Like I said, I used to look at that as something that's bad. Now I look at it as like, that's the only thing that could motivate you to be good, as long as that. Because I mean, the span of their careers to maintain that level of tennis. I mean, Mike Bryan. People are talking about Novak, who's been, I think, number one in the world now for 331 weeks or something, 332 weeks. Mike Bryan is at 510 weeks, number one in the world. I mean, that's ludicrous. Yeah, man. You know, so to maintain that level of discipline and focus over the span of time you need something more, you know. And I think that's where, like you mentioned Kobe Bryant earlier, they have an intrinsic desire to be good, and it's very difficult to fake that, I think, because I looked at my last, let's say, one thing I'm proud of. I've now won a title on the ATP Tour for the last 9 years, and that's a sample size in their career, you know. Like, I mean, they've won. They probably have 9 years of where they won 7 or more tournaments, you know. So like, their career consistency is unlike anything we've seen, and they sort of the go-to whenever we discuss what you want to achieve in doubles, because it's 125 titles, 16, 17 Grand Slams, every Master Series multiple times.
Yeah.
It's when you talk about it, it's incredible what they achieved.
Raven, another inspirational story. We got to let you go, but Jeff Coetzee, you know so well, is that he was in that bad car accident and he was told he may never play again. And then he came back and he won another ATP title. But you've got to get off to the trainer. This has been great. You're going to be.
Yeah, no, I mean,
looking at my watch.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of time.
Okay.
I've got a little bit of time here. But Jeff, yeah, he's a good friend of mine. I know him quite well. And these days we don't talk as much as we used to, because actually he's coaching the Colombian team of Cabal and Farah, and we've had some sticky matches with them, semifinals of Wimbledon, semifinals of World Tour finals, and we've gotten the better of them. They've gotten the better of us. So it gets competitive out there. But Jeff is another, like when you talk to him, you can tell he's driving desire and hunger to be good. So when he came back from that car accident, and I've spoken to him about it. I mean, his hip was dislocated, and the first responders, they actually popped his hip back into place before they drove him to the hospital. And the doctors, the specialists, said if they didn't do that, by the time he got to the hospital, if his leg had hung dislocated for that long, chances are he would have lost some function in that leg. So like, the guys who responded popped his hip back into place, and then they drove off. And that was the difference between him coming back to tour. And he ended up making the semifinals of Australian Open after he had surgery, and he made the World Tour finals with Wesley Moody. So, I mean, but if you just look at as Jeff today, how diligent he is about practice and how driven he is to succeed, then you understand why he was able to come back from that. Because like I said, the first thing that I think has become better with me is just decision making when it comes to my career. You understand what could hurt you and what's beneficial, and I think that's the standout thing for me with watching these guys on tour. There's very few people that can survive on the ATP tour. There are a couple. I won't go into them. There are a few that can kind of coast and make it, but there's very few of them.
Yeah, with Jeff, it was his nephew that lost his life in that accident as well.
Yeah,
right?
terrible car accident that was. Yeah, and like I said, Jeff, that he still, to this day, it still hurts him. But like I said, Jeff is a highly motivated individual, and he's not afraid of putting in the work.
Yeah, he's a winner. What about Davis Cup format? What do you think? You're playing that after the U.S. Open.
Yeah, they've changed it now. The format was great for many years, but the way the sport's working now is that they had to kind of adjust with the times, because players, the way income is structured and stuff, players are making different decisions, and they've tried to kind of adjust a format that makes it easier for players to play Davis Cup. Again, because there's very few countries that actually have a Davis Cup set up where the financial rewards outweigh what sort of the rewards of the honor of playing your country is. So like the Grand Slam countries obviously have great support systems, so they generally don't have a problem getting a team together. When you get to smaller federations, it gets hard, and that's where Davis Cup had to be creative about how they're doing the new formats. And going down to 3 sets was an adjustment. But I think that if you like certain countries where you have one good player and then sort of like a drop off in performance, and you expect that guy to play 5 sets Friday, 5 sets Saturday, 5 sets Sunday, fly off on Monday, and then have to play a tournament the next week, was unrealistic. So they've kind of tried to change the format and make it easier for players to commit. And I think it's been a step in the right direction, because I have noticed that I think a few more players are making themselves available, because the workload and the risk is a little bit lower now. We actually will play against Venezuela after the US Open, and we play 2 singles on Saturday, and then we start Sunday morning with a doubles first, followed by 2 singles again.
And who's your captain now?
Our captain is Christoph van Rensburg now. Yeah.
Okay.
He played many years on tour, and he's actually living in the US now. So this will be his first tie as Davis Cup captain. Marcus Andruska was the captain for the last few years before him.
Oh, ask him to show you some magic tricks.
Yeah, I mean, he always gives me grief that I don't hit my volleys hard enough. So he's like, Raven, let me show you how to hit a volley. You're firm. So hopefully this week I get some tips on how to volley, because that's all he could do. He would keep the ball low and run to net. So
yeah, who did he play with? Did he play with Anacone?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I know that he won Australian Open in doubles. I think his career high in singles was 19, and for many years he traveled with Ivan Lendl, and they practiced together. And he said that really benefited him a lot to practice with a guy that could hit the ball like Ivan. So you just by default practicing with him every day, you get better.
Yeah, no, I think he held the number one ranking in doubles, though, didn't he? Annika?
Yes, got to number one and won Australian Open. I know that.
With
So I've got some work to do.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your comment on Davis Cup. I thought that they should just do it, like the Olympics, or every 2 years, every 4 years. But as soon as the team would win it, you turn around and the next year starts again. But not going back to, I think, 73. I think that's the year. If you had won the final, or if you had won the year before, you were just grandfathered right into the final. You didn't have to play any preliminary matches.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's a byproduct of like I said, how the schedule has happened is that there used to be slightly less tournaments, so you would have more weeks off. Now what we had, I mean, I live in South Africa, so let's say I'm playing the tour in Europe, or I'm playing the tour in Asia, and then all of a sudden we have a tie, because oftentimes you play this tie after the US Open. And oftentimes we had a tie, let's say before Monte Carlo. Then you would come from Indian Wells. I would fly about 27 to 30 hours home to play at 7,000 feet altitude, just to turn around the next week to go play at a sea level clay court event. So then you're like, well, that is awful preparation sort of success. So like for South Africans or the New Zealanders are even worse. Like you got to fly all over the place to get back there to play a tie, and then you're flying back again. So eventually it wasn't that players didn't want to play Davis Cup. It's just like, hey man, I'm actually shooting myself in the foot here by making this traveling decision. So and especially like for South Africans, again, let's say Dubai is usually at the end of February, followed by Indian Wells on the West Coast in the US. Now, there's a little week in between there where they sometimes play Davis Cup. Now, if you imagine me flying from Dubai south to South Africa, playing a match till Sunday night, then flying Monday, flying back to the West Coast of the States with a 9-hour time change and 30 hours of travel, and then trying to have any sort of success at Indian Wells, it's a very difficult decision to make and say, hey man, guys, I'm going to come play Davis Cup this week. So effectively something had to happen where they just made it kind of fit in with the schedule more, because there aren't 2 or 3 week gaps anymore where you can just comfortably put the tie in and be like, well, guys have time to recover and travel and get ready for the next event.
Raven, here's one. You just tell us when you got to run. John Posey. What comes to your mind when you hear the name John Posey?
Wow. I mean, John, I was actually talking about him the other day. 2 things that stood out to me. I speak under correction here, but the one time I ran a mile time with him and he went off training for months after that, and eventually ran a 4:36, which to me seems incredibly painful to do.
Yeah.
I mean that. And then one time I did a plank with John Posey where we did a plank challenge, and I think he has the highest pain threshold of anybody I've ever seen, because he was vibrating like crazy to get to like 4 minutes and something in the plank. And legendary guy, like just he could really put the work in, and no pain was too much for John.
Yeah, he could not inflict pain, but he could endure pain. Posey, for our listeners, he was cut from his college tennis team, and Sam Garcia sent him to us, one of our former students, and he made changes in his game, and he went back and he made the lineup playing at Bowdoin, a small school in Maine. But I took Posey to run a mile the first time, and he went out and he came around in like 54 seconds, something really very, very fast, and he barely finished. And then this is the craziest. When he finally came to, this is where I had problems with Posey. I said, Posey, you just can't go out that fast. He said 54 seconds. I think I could break 4 minutes. And I go, Posey. Posey actually said to me when he first came, he goes, I'd like to invent a shot. I go, okay, Posey. Posey's, our listeners should know. Everybody loved the guy. Work ethic. I told his parents at one point, it's a great way to compliment parents. He was just so low maintenance. Yeah. He used to use a garbage bag. Yeah. That was his shoulder bag. One time at the Tampa airport, which is a good hike, he didn't think it was that far, because when you get in the car, you swing around, and it just seems like it's just 5 minutes. So Posey didn't want to burden anyone. He walked from the Tampa airport to the HCC facility.
Goodness gracious.
We have a short video on this. This could be a good one to end with, but we need to do another podcast. Yeah. The Lions Walk. So we had a patch of grass from one sidewalk to the next. It was maybe 40 yards, and we started doing the bear walk. And Posey he was our number one. So Raven was there off and on. I mean, that was your base. So maybe you were away for like 2 or 3 weeks, and we got into this thing. Okay, who's the best for the bear walk? And no one could beat Posey, right? No pain. So Klaasen comes back, and I said, all right, you and Posey, you're going to race the bear walk. So Raven, our listeners should know, he's a very, very humble guy. But so they get down, and Klaasen just kills him. He finishes, and Posey's at the 20-yard line, about 40-yard line. So Raven, from Africa, he walks back, and he just looks at everybody and goes, Lions walk.
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember John Doran, who we didn't connect with until late. He was somebody we talked to about traveling with you, and at that time he was ready to come off the tour. And I remember him telling everybody, he goes, I got an announcement. Everybody needs to listen. He goes, everybody here, you need to quit tennis in 10 years' time. And I said, well, why is that, John? He goes, because Posey's going to be able to beat all of us 6-0, 6-0. Because this guy used to go to the backboard. He would take a gallon of water, and he would take, we're taking Sunday off, for example. He would go to the backboard. He'd take a gallon of water. He would take bananas with peanut butter and bagels with peanut butter, banana. Yeah. Where are you going, Posey? He'd be gone like 10 hours just hitting on the backboard.
Probably the only person who would come close to beating a backboard.
Yeah, but I thought that would get you going. I remember being at the Open one time, and Posey's there, and that guy could read a book in a snowstorm. So I said, Posey, stay right here. And I said, I'm going to go get Raven in the Players Lounge because I had the credentials to go get you. And Posey, oh no, he'd be too busy. He won't want to come and see me. I said, Posey, are you kidding me? Yeah. You're Raven's. You're his role model. You're number one. Yeah. You say John Posey to Raven Klaasen, his face is just going to light up.
What a guy! Yeah,
that was fun though.
That was a lot of fun. All right, guys, we should do this again.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, let's do it, father son. Awesome. That would be good to talk to you and your dad to help out people with bringing their kids up in tennis. That's what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks again for your time, Raven.
Yeah, all the best to your family. Good luck at
anytime.
Thank
matches. You. Appreciate that, guys.
All right,
thank you.
See you, man.
Thank you very much. Bye, guys.
Bye. Well, thanks again to Raven for spending some time out of his schedule. It's not easy, all the logistics with pro tennis Raven was talking about. I mean, really, you got to take care of your body. And, with all the travel involved with pro tennis at that level around the world, I mean, it is a lot, the jet lag and hopping on one plane and going from one surface to another. And there's a lot to it. It's not so simple. It's not so glamorous.
You can catch up with someone if you've known him a long time and know him well. It takes a minute to catch up. When he first came to the U.S., he's a teenager. He's 18 years old, and in Tampa, he just couldn't believe that families had 3 cars. He just couldn't believe that like a 16-year-old would be given a car.
Yeah,
it was just hungry dog hunts best in
different world.
But yeah, so many things. Great guy.
No. A lot of good stuff there. I think, for the players out there, junior players or aspiring tennis players, just, where he's talking about, hey, you got to do all the little things every single day, even when you don't want to. It's like you got to do it. That story with Andy Murray at the U.S. Open, I think, is great. So important for players to know that. It's like, okay, take your shake, do all those little things.
Enthusiasm. I mean, talking about cars, Raven loved cars. So on a Friday night, there was a place where you could just go look at all these old classic cars. And it was just right around the corner from where we were staying in Tampa. But enthusiasm, spirit, love of the game.
Yeah.
This great passion. But I think the discipline, the work ethic.
Yeah.
And I think I wouldn't want to bring it up at this point because he's 39 or soon to be 39, and hopefully he's playing 10 more years. But with whatever he wants to do in tennis, I mean, he can certainly work in TV, he can be a coach. I mean, but he is very, very knowledgeable, but he has the ability to communicate that knowledge.
Yeah, well spoken and humble. Non-pretentious is nice. It's refreshing.
I always tell people, say, Raven, just remember, I taught you one thing. I taught you how to run. You just saw me with my poor posture going up and down the court, pushing the basketballs, and that's where you got your speed. Because he is fast. He is fast.
Yeah, great athlete.
But the line walk, look it up. Maybe you can find it. Raven Klaasen line walk. Look it up on YouTube.
All right, everybody.
It's a great story.
Thanks for listening. Find us online, GreatBase Tennis. Watch out for Raven Klaasen.
And Andy's averaging. Steve is super. Is that how it's going to start?
It's more like Andy's awesome and Steve is...
Stupid?
I wasn't going to say it. I was going to say kind of dumb, but I got to use the S. So,
yeah.
Andy's awesome and Steve is stupid.
It's like I ask kids, I'll tell kids, you're really intelligent, which they are. Kids are intelligent, but they're not clever. My father used to tell me I had the brains that God gave little green apples. I think he was calling me dumb. So I'll tell a kid, you're really smart. So I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it. Are you stupid? Of course, I've already told him like 5 times. I'm going to tell you that you're smart. I'm going to ask you this question.
Yeah.
Are you stupid or are you stubborn? And they go, I'm stubborn. Yeah, you're so stubborn. You're stupid. and that's the case. Only parents know that so well.
Yep.
How's the joke go? Why do grandparents and grandkids get along so well?
Common enemy.
They have a common enemy.
Yeah.
And the parents, it's like, you can hear a tennis mom tell their child, you should tie your shoe. And they go, what do you know about tennis? It's like, I guess we could do on this. Children, listen to your parents. Raven Klaasen, he listened to his parents.
Yep. All right, Rambo.
Yes, Rambo.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. Adios.